If you ask most people who leads the world in military power, they'll point to the biggest budget or the flashiest stealth jets. But if you ask me, I'll tell you it's the military that knows how to evolve when it's backed into a corner. For years, the headlines have been dominated by the unbeatable myths of the East, Russia's Zircon, the Kinzhal. We were told the US had lost the hypersonic race. But look at the mud of Ukraine. Those invincible hypersonic missiles are being swatted out of the sky by Patriot systems like clay pigeons at a state fair. The myth is dead. What's replacing it isn't another billion-dollar exquisite weapon, it's something far more terrifying for our adversaries. It's cold, it's clinical, and it's coming in numbers that the world's air defenses simply cannot calculate. Today, we are talking about the US military's ultimate countermove, Project Blackbeard. This isn't a product of the old slow-moving defense giants. Its DNA comes from the crazy engineers at SpaceX who decided the Pentagon's way of building missiles was broken. This missile wasn't born in a windowless room at Lockheed Martin or Raytheon. Castellion, founded just back in 2022, is led by Brian Hargis and Andrew Kreitz. These guys didn't just work at SpaceX, they lived the fail fast, iterate faster philosophy. They saw how SpaceX disrupted the entire global launch industry by building rockets that were good enough to be cheap, but advanced enough to win. When they looked at the Pentagon's hypersonic programs, projects like Dark Eagle or the ARRW, they didn't see progress. They saw museum pieces. These legacy programs were treated like fine art. They cost hundreds of millions per unit. They took a decade to develop. And if one failed during a test, the entire program was put on life support for 2 years while a committee investigated. Castellion walked into the Pentagon and said, "Stop trying to build a silver bullet that can destroy the world. You need a fast food missile. You need something that we can build like a Toyota Camry, produce by the thousands, and treat as expendable ammo." The Pentagon listened. In less than 2 years, Castellion got a $105 million Navy contract and a successful high-speed flight test. That speed is unheard of in modern defense, and the result of that speed is Blackbeard. Let's talk specs. On paper, Blackbeard might look unimpressive. The Russian Zircon carries a warhead weighing several hundred kilograms. It's designed to sink a carrier with one hit. Blackbeard? It carries a tiny 43-kilogram high-explosive warhead. To some, that sounds like a glorified firecracker. If your goal is to vaporize an entire carrier strike group, you need a heavy, expensive missile. But if your goal is to win a high-end conflict in the Pacific, you don't need to sink every ship. You just need to punch out their eyes and ears. A 43 kilograms warhead, moving at Mach 5, carries a staggering amount of kinetic energy. When that hits a radar array, a mobile command center, or a communication hub, it doesn't just explode, it disintegrates everything in its path. The US military ran the numbers. Why use a multi-million-dollar Tomahawk cruise missile to hit a radar station when you can send a swarm of Blackbeards for a fraction of the cost? Castellion is aiming for a unit price of $380,000 per missile. Let that sink in. A standard interceptor for an S-400 or a modern Western system costs between $2 million and $4 million. When an adversary sees 50 Blackbeards screaming toward them at Mach 5, what will happen? If they fire back, they go bankrupt. They will run out of interceptors 10 times faster than the US can build Blackbeards. If they don't fire, their billion-dollar defense grid is reduced to smoking scrap metal in 3 minutes. As mass drone warfare became the new reality, critics mocked the US military for being stuck in a cost exchange trap. Now the tables have turned, and it's America's opponents who are facing that impossible choice. The Pentagon isn't just window shopping, they are all in. In the latest fiscal year budget proposals, the US has outlined a massive procurement ramp-up. For the first year, 2027, the Navy plans to buy 353 units. By 2031, they want a stockpile of 1,375 missiles. This is just the pilot phase. Once the production lines, which Castellion is designing to mirror Tesla's gigafactories, are fully operational, we are looking at a capacity of thousands of missiles per year. This creates a nightmare for any adversary's air defense corps. You can train your crews to handle 1 or 2 high-speed targets, but you cannot train a system to handle a production line that is faster than your reload time. One of the most critical design features of Blackbeard is its size. Because it's compact, it's platform agnostic. It's not picky about how it gets to the fight. The Navy's FA-18 Super Hornets can carry a significant load of these, but the real game changer is the F-35. Traditional hypersonic missiles are so large they have to be carried externally, which ruins the F-35's stealth profile. You might as well fly a giant neon sign that says, "Here I am." But the Blackbeard is small enough that the F-35 can fit 4 of them inside its internal weapons bay. Imagine a squadron of 4 F-35s slipping through the gaps in a radar net, undetected. They reach the edge of the engagement zone, 800 kilometers out, and suddenly unleash 16 hypersonic missiles simultaneously. The enemy won't even know who pulled the trigger until the first radar arrays start exploding. But Blackbeard's ambition doesn't end at the coastline, it's moving to the dirt. If this logic works at sea, why not use it to turn every artillery battery into a strategic threat? This is where the ground-launched version of Blackbeard comes in. One of the biggest mistakes people make when looking at weapons is focusing only on range. They see 800 kilometers and think, okay, that's fine, but you have to look at the system capability. The US Army and Marines already have hundreds of M142 HIMARS and M270 launchers. These are mature, battle-tested platforms with a global logistics chain. Currently, a HIMARS is limited. If you want to hit something 500 kilometers away, you need the expensive precision strike missile. But Castellion has designed the Blackbeard to be compatible with existing HIMARS launch canisters. Think about that. It's a plug-in for the Army's favorite toy. In the fiscal year 2026 budget, the Army has already allocated $25 million specifically for the GL Blackbeard. They aren't looking for a 10-year R&D cycle. They want to put this in a box, slide it into a HIMARS, and conduct live-fire tests by the first quarter of 2026. This rapid prototyping approach allows the US to deploy hypersonic fire from Guam, the Philippines, or any remote island chain at a moment's notice. It proves that the US military's hardware and software interfaces have reached a level of standardization that allows for instant lethality. This brings us to the where. Where will these little pirates show up first? While the Pacific is the obvious answer, the US is keeping a very close eye on the Arctic, specifically the Barents Sea. Why the Arctic? Because that is the lifeblood of Russia's nuclear submarine fleet. It's a cramped, cold, and radar-cluttered environment. In a place like the Barents Sea, a massive carrier strike group is a vulnerable target. But a swarm of low-cost hypersonics? They thrive in that chaos. By deploying Blackbeard, the US is creating a hypersonic no-fly zone in the Arctic. If you are a Russian commander in the north, you now have to deal with F-35s that don't need tanker support or large AWACS planes to clear the way. They can just sneak in, drop a dozen Blackbeards, and vanish. The US is redefining the standard of a great power military. It's no longer about having the most expensive toys. It's about having the ability to turn cutting-edge tech into massive industrial output and, eventually, into the most affordable means of destruction. This is a capability only the United States currently possesses. From the commercial success of SpaceX to the missile miracle of Castellion, we are seeing the terror-inducing power of the US civilian tech sector feeding the military machine. But weapon is perfect. Blackbeard has weaknesses. First, let's talk guidance. To keep the cost at $380,000, you have to make compromises. The guidance systems and anti-jamming tech on a Blackbeard aren't going to be as robust as a $50 million Dark Eagle. Against a top-tier electronic warfare power, these missiles might lose their way. Second, the warhead. 43 kilograms is great for poking eyes out, But if you're trying to take down a reinforced underground bunker or a massive bridge, Blackbeard might just leave a dent. Then there's the supply chain. Castellion relies on civilian-grade components to keep costs down. If that supply chain, largely dependent on global trade, gets severed in a hot war, the affordable mass logic starts to crumble. We know this. That's why Blackbeard isn't the game finisher. In the US doctrine, Blackbeard is the lead dog. Its job is to rush in, overwhelm the defenses, blow up the radars, and exhaust the enemy's energy. Once the enemy is blind, deaf, and out of ammo, then the heavy hitters, the B-21 Raiders, the Dark Eagles, and the carriers, come in to finish the job. This division of labor, organized, cold-blooded, and systematic, is the highest form of modern warfare. The US military is often criticized for being slow and bureaucratic, and for a few years in the hypersonic race, that was true. But the arrival of Castellion and the Blackbeard program marks a massive pivot. They aren't afraid of failing in tests. They aren't afraid of missiles exploding on the launch pad during R&D. They are only afraid of standing still. With the first order of 353 missiles coming in fiscal year 2027, the era of commoditized hypersonics has begun. It's not just a victory for the Navy, it's a total shift in how we think about power. In the face of absolute industrial capacity and a standardized system, flashy tactical martial arts don't matter. You can have the best invincible missile in the world, but if I have 1,300 good enough missiles that cost less than your car, you've already lost. That's why I still bet on the US military. They acknowledge when they've fallen behind, and then they evolve at a speed that makes the competition look like they're standing still. But I want to hear from you. Do you think affordable mass is the right strategy? Or is the US taking too much of a risk by relying on small warheads and cheaper components? Should we be focusing more on the silver bullets or the fast food missiles? Drop your thoughts in the comments.